I'm Mike Brilla, host of the Inspired Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Angela Arnold. Angela is the general manager of Overdrive's education division. Overdrive is a global digital content platform for libraries and schools. We had so much fun talking about this. This is so cool. You're going to learn a lot about resources that are provided to help get kids reading. This is cool stuff. Thanks for being here. And oh, by the way, it would be so cool if you went to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, left a review. When you go to that website, you have the possibility of joining my email list. You could take a look at some of the blogs that I've been sharing and, listen to other podcasts, other episodes from the past. That'd be so cool. Thanks so much for listening. And, you could do me a huge favor, which would be share it with a friend. Could you do that for me? Thanks so much. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
When they have a digital collection that they've curated and purchased and made available to the students, every school decides what books are in their collection. Overdrive doesn't decide, schools decide. So when they decide what books they want in their collection, they're going to make those available in a number of different lending and access models. And students will come and check out a book. Depending on the access model, if it's a one copy, one user model, and they only have one copy, then the student will check it out for the loan period. And then when they return it, the next student can check it out. That's very much like the print model. However, digital does cooler things sometimes, right, than print. There are simultaneous use models where kids can come in, all the kids can come in and check it out, unlimited use.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Angela Arnold is the general manager of Overdrive's education division, a global digital content platform for libraries and schools. A former librarian, Angela brings to her role a wealth of experience developing and promoting reading materials for a wide audience of library patrons and other readers. Today, her team focuses on serving K-12 students through Overdrive Education's Sora. It's a reading app, providing access to a catalog of eBooks, audiobooks, read-alongs, and other digital reading content to help students succeed both in and out of the classroom. Angela, glad to have you here. Welcome to the show, and thanks so much for joining me. Please say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Steve.
Well, glad that you're here, Angela, and I got to start with this. I mean, as a former librarian, you bring a unique perspective to your role. I mean, why'd you want to be a librarian? What's something that you truly liked about doing that?
It feels like ages ago, but when I first got into the profession, I kind of fell into it by accident. I actually met a person who was in their second year of their master's program, explaining to me about all of the ways that she was making an impact and reaching communities and leveraging her undergraduate experience to really transform communities. And the way she described it, it felt a lot less like an academic pursuit and more like community activism. And that appealed to me. There's a phrase somebody told me one time. They said, librarians are only come in two kinds. They're either quietly subversive or raging.
Nice.
And I love that quote because I thought, yes, this is about right. There's two speeds. And I think I'm more on the raging end of things. You feel passionate, you feel outspoken, you feel very motivated to make a difference in the world. And I think that is definitely something that's true for most librarians.
That's awesome. Yes, as a former high school principal, all right, who has worked with multiple librarians, media specialists, whatever term you want to use, I have had some where I have had run-ins with the protector of the books, someone who it's like, this is the realm, this is my realm, and none shall pass. And then had the others who are the protector of everything out there, not the protector of the books. Instead, it's protector of knowledge. Welcome to my knowledge world. And my favorite experience with that was way before everybody was talking about Google. I had a media specialist who was introducing me to something called Google. And she was teaching me, I sat through these different lessons with her and a couple other staff members. And my world was a little insane at the time. And so it didn't take hold as quickly, but within a year, it turned out like 2 years later, the whole world's Google-fied. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, she was like clairvoyant here, something like that. But I have to say this, because my other favorite interaction that I have to note is I was in the library and I was waiting for something, and I watched her do an interaction with a kid where the kid was looking for a picture of Abraham Lincoln, and had been spending a lot of time online searching for a picture of Abraham Lincoln that he liked. And she said, you don't need to spend all this time. And she went over, she did the old school thing. And she said, I got any number of pictures right here. And he's like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And, that's such an encapsulating moment, right? Is when it's a young patron who has an interaction with a librarian, because they occupy the same physical space. They're in the building together. There are books. That moment is surprisingly, it's facilitated. It's common. It's in every community. I mean, there's a library in almost every town. And I think that, the more that we can connect kids to that moment, put them in that space, whether it's their school library or whether it's the public library, that's the place where you can have a free and open discovery of your own intellectual curiosity. You can be curious about whatever, and there's someone to facilitate and guide that for you and with you. And I think that that's kind of a unique experience for any person, and young people in particular.
I love that. That's so cool, because you're talking to someone who grew up in an area of Florida as a child who and young adult who they had bookmobiles.
Yes.
And that was cool.
Well, they brought the place to the student, to the person, right? And
yes.
Then you've got there are librarians on board and media specialists and people there to help. But you're facilitating that place, that space, that moment where somebody can say, I am curious about, I want to know more about, I wonder. Those are really important questions that make us all lifelong learners. And I think that's what we're trying to support. That's our work here at Overdrive in our education division is, how can we do that for students in a digital sense, right? I'm not physically co-located with the student, with the reader. How can I do that virtually? Because that is also just as valid a need as being in the physical place.
That's so cool. And you've given me a great segue. But before I go there, I got to tell you about something, because we're talking about with kids, and we're going to be talking about with kids and stuff. But even when I got my doctorate, I am so thankful for the knowledge of the librarian. All right, because there were graduate students there and stuff like this, and they were helpful, but not like the librarian. Because there's sometimes because you're looking for that right thing, and you're doing this, and you're doing that, and you say, "Can you help me with this?" And they're like, "Can I help you with this?" And next thing you know, it's like, "Forget these over here. You need to be in this. Come over here, and let me show you what you should be looking at on the computer right here. And this is going to help you." And the next thing I know is I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay." So even all the way through adults, I had to bring that up because I have great fan of the librarians, and so and in dissertation land they connect you with other librarians across the world, and it's like, check this out, I'm doing good now. So anyway,
yeah, I appreciate that the moment that you have, oh, look at this, that moment, that feeling, that's such a common reaction for anybody who is turned on to the thing they were looking for. I wondered, and now my curiosity is satisfied. That feeling, it's gratification, right? What's interesting about your story is that gratification can happen for someone who's very accomplished and very educated. You showed up already being very proficient in knowledge and information and gathering data, and you still have that moment, right? You still have that gratification. It can happen for someone like yourself just as much as it can for a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, or somebody who's in a lap sit or a story time.
It sure can. That's what's so cool. And I think that the importance of this type of work is great. So let's start switching here, because you made a switch from being a librarian to the position you're in now. So can you talk to us about what made you curious? What made you take that leap there?
Well, I'm actually what we call at Overdrive a boomeranger. It's somebody who used to work here and then comes back.
Nice.
Boomerang. So I worked at Overdrive back in the early 2000s when our library products were just in their nascent stages. And so I think I had a succession of really crazy titles like library liaison and, I working on projects to help proselytize digital books with, amongst librarians in the public library sphere. I worked for Overdrive a number of years then. Did some other things in the interim, raised a family, did some stuff, pursued some other career ambitions, came back in 2019 to Overdrive, actually 2020, to lead the education business unit. And I showed up in 2020 and then in January, and then things happened. Just a couple months later, everything changed for us when the pandemic hit. And that was unexpected. And it was incredibly transformative for me personally, our business unit, all of our team members and our company, and obviously K-12 and America. It was a moment. And I think that was, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced in my career. And I'm so glad to have been part of supporting the schools that were trying to educate students during a pandemic. It was, I'm sure books will be written.
Yeah.
Someone, maybe you'll write a book on it, Steve, but I think it was a moment, it was a time, but I am struck by how incredibly adaptive and how creative K-12's response was to the pandemic. Kids got to read, kids got to learn. I know we weren't sure. There's a lot of, you were there. It was a time, it was a moment, a lot of lack of information and fear and a lot of confusion, right? And yet, we had to keep educating kids. And so our function here at Overdrive within the Sora team was to support the schools that were still trying to do their work. By hook or by crook, they were still trying to get those kids educated and get them into books. So that was when, a lot of things changed for our business.
Oh, I can imagine, because it's, like you're talking about. I mean, it just was a nice shock to the system there. And I live in the Atlanta area and in Metro Atlanta, and 75 through the state of Georgia is a nightmare most days, because especially just south of Atlanta. And it's just amazing how it was like we were in some sort of weird movie about the apocalypse or something like this, because there was almost nobody driving on that interstate. And you're like, wow, I could drive in the left lane, I could drive in the right lane, I could drive in the far right lane, I could drive in the far left lane. And, and it's like, that was really weird feeling. But one of the things I was going to say, like you were talking about, and going through this, trying to figure out how to get education to help kids still be able to do stuff and learn stuff. I knew superintendents who drove buses that had a little device in it that did Wi-Fi, and they drove it to these big church parking lots in these rural communities, and so that people could then connect to the Wi-Fi that way. They didn't have connectivity, and that was, so people did stuff like that, as well as superintendents and principals and teachers driving and delivering meals and stuff. So any number of things.
Totally. And your story about the weird post-apocalyptic empty freeway, right? Like, how crazy is that? It's like, that's the thing of science fiction movies.
Yes.
And yet we all adapted to thinking of that as, this is normal. We're gonna work through this. We all just kind of internalized that this is what the street looks like now today, and I'm going to get on with my life and figure out how to educate kids, right? If you're a school teacher, if you're an educator, they're going to wake up in the morning and figure out how they're going to continue to do their job. And I think that adaptability, that the ability to evolve and adapt to the new situation has been something that I've come to appreciate and try to emulate, because educators do this all the time. They've always done it. Pandemic made everybody do it more and faster.
Yes.
and with more or less funding and in masks. But that that mindset, that growth mindset, that change mindset is something that really, I think, is the thing that helped me be better in my job, and something that I really admire. And I will say that that growth mindset, how are we going to make change, is something that still sticks with me. It still resonates with me today. This is the key learning for me. Somebody said during the pandemic, when a forest fire decimates a forest, what grows back is new growth. And it's going to be different, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to grow faster because there's more sunlight. And, that analogy is like, wait, that's a metaphor, but like, it's going to grow back, and it's going to grow back faster, and stronger perhaps, and different than it was before. And it creates opportunity for new seedlings. And I thought that that was something really interesting, because we definitely saw that with digital reading. We definitely saw that with the tools that schools were using. And now that we're in 2024 here, there are absolutely some trends that are now evident on this side of the pandemic. Through a couple of years later, we're now seeing things like, yeah, schools did embrace digital learning. They did change. That new growth of the forest looks like digital reading, looks like embracing digital tools, looks like digital curricula, right? All of the things that educators are trying to do, they were doing during the pandemic, they're now instituting and embracing here in a physical, teaching space. We can be back in school again, and yet they've still adapted. They took what worked and are using it here. Now that sounds very surface, and I'm happy to talk to you about like everybody's like, yeah, we changed. Yeah, okay, duh. But I think that there are some real key insights that we have, that we're seeing about what that looks like for digital reading. I'd love to talk about that. I think it's so interesting what actually stuck. Cool. With digital books.
Well, how about before we do that, and then we could segue into that. If you just kind of give an overview of Overdrive and Sora, and just kind of talk a little bit about how that works with schools, and then let's go into how you saw those changing reading patterns and such.
Sure, thanks. Overdrive is the world's leading digital media supplier. We are important to institutions like libraries, schools, corporations, and we have several different products. We are a company that supports Libby, the public library app. So you might know our company. Most people would know our company because of Libby, the reading app that they get free books and free audiobooks from their public library. That's absolutely the mothership of Overdrive, and is in over 90 countries around the world who enjoy Libby. Sora, which is our product, is the K-12 reading app. And Sora is for students. Sora is a digital reading platform that ensures that every student in a school has access to the right books. So it's a little different when you're talking about students reading digital books than a public library patron who's an adult who has a library card. So those are two different ecosystems where Overdrive supplies digital books. And I am very pleased to note that our company is a B Corporation, which is a different type of incorporation model. It stands for Benefit Corp. And so Overdrive is a mission-driven organization. Our mission is a world enlightened by reading. So I worked in a lot of businesses where you have to find your why. Working here and working in Sora, working in K-12 and supporting reading for kids, that why is super easy. You get up in the morning and you say, I connect kids with books. Super easy. And I really do like the mission of our organization.
That's so cool. Because it's a neat thing. So you mentioned something I got to ask, because having been somebody who worked on a dissertation in a college where I'm a history person, all right, and so I was doing a history where I'm delving into the stacks at the University of Georgia, where they have all this stuff that goes way back, and so my dissertation covered from 1900 to 1980. So I'm looking at books that many hadn't been taken off the shelf in years, and I could prove it because the card was stamped like 1944. And it was funny when I was checking out some of those books, and the graduate student many of these weren't graduate students. They were like freshmen or sophomores who were working the desks. Do you see the last time this book was checked out? I said, yeah, I'm taking it on a field trip. So it's, so you kind of mentioned the whole, do they check out books electronically? Is that what this is that it's electronic format, and
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's not somebody stamping a card or something like that, but
It does work similarly, right? And just to kind of back up and give you kind of the high level of what is Sora and maybe just kind of orient for you. Sora is a digital reading platform, meaning there is a purchasing portal for schools where they can purchase books. And then there's an app and an interface for reading of the books. So there's kind of a front end and a back end. Sora is an institutional product, meaning we sell into schools because it's not a consumer product, it's for schools at the district level primarily. And what, just to again give you a high level, Sora is free. The platform is free. It comes with hundreds of free books, including all of the stuff, the good stuff of the public domain, like Call of the Wild or Romeo and Juliet. You have to read that stuff in school. But it also comes with free premium content as well. And so that is to help people understand how it works, get a trial for it, understand how easy it is to check out a digital book. Then when schools feel that they're ready to customize their digital collection, they can purchase books that they want to make available to their students. When they have a digital collection that they've curated and purchased and made available to the students, every school decides what books are in their collection. Overdrive doesn't decide, schools decide. So when they decide what books they want in their collection, they're going to make those available in a number of different lending and access models. And students will come and check out a book. Depending on the access model, if it's a one copy, one user model, and they only have one copy, then the student will check it out for the loan period. And then when they return it, the next student can check it out. That's very much like the print model. However, digital does cooler things sometimes, right, than print. There are simultaneous use models where kids can come in, all the kids can come in and check it out, unlimited use. And then there are digital class sets models, right? These are ways when, kids can come in and they can, the school might furnish 100 digital copies. They can all come and get them for the same class at the same time. And that's a 90-day use model. So that's super in the weeds. But I will say this, the other phrase that I say a lot is that, it's like, kale. A lot of people don't like kale. And I always say, well, anything kale can do, Swiss chard can do better. Right? It's not, there's people like kale and it's called for in many recipes and it's durable and you got to have kale because people like it. But Swiss chard is actually not better. It's sweeter. It's easier to cook and grow. It does things that kale can't do.
Nice.
And I like to say that digital does things that print can't do, right? If
Yes.
anything print can do, digital may be able to do a little bit better in some fashion. So, there's always a place for print, but digital can do things like, for example, hit a button and every kid is provisioned the book on their school issued device. And that's kind of mind-blowing when you think about the reasons why schools need books. How do schools use books? Well, they use them for pleasure reading, right? Everybody needs to read Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Babysitter Club and the Wings of Fire series. Like, people want the Harry Potter. Everybody wants books, right? You got to have pleasure reading. And that's what turns on kids. I Survived and all of these franchises and brands and stuff. Kids love that stuff. That's pleasure reading that's going to turn on a kid and create a lifelong love of reading. Schools also use books for required reads and curricular applications where they say, okay, we're all going to read Esperanza Rising, right? Maybe in 7th grade, everybody's reading that book. That's an assigned read. Well, the class has 30 paper copies in the classroom for in-class reading, but they don't leave the classroom. So how is the student going to read the book if they can't take it home, right? Is the expectation that mom and dad are going to buy that book for the student, or that they're going to take the kid to the library, the public library, and go get one? Because the school library had a couple copies, but they're checked out. So it's like, that limited supply and the need for that book, it's required, right? In a lot of ways, digital can be an equity tool too, because like I said, you hit that button, boom, 2 hours, every kid has that book on their Chromebook.
That's cool.
And now every kid has access to the book in the format that they want. So a lot of times we talk about digital books as an equity tool in K-12 because kids come to reading on their own terms. You got to meet kids where they are and give them the book in the way, in the manner, in the moment, in the place that they need to succeed. Because it's not just pleasure reading, it's required reading, it's supplemental reading, it's accommodations, it's IEPs, it's 504. You got to have the right book for the right kid.
I love that. It's so cool. And I'm going to pop back up into that dissertation world for a second, because one of the crazy things that now this is as things are digitizing, all right, and all kinds of stuff like this, and how people use the if they needed to get that book that you just checked out, they were I missed that book. So at the university, they could do is they go ahead and put in a request for that book. So you were only allowed to keep it for 2 weeks. So then the librarian taught you that, if they, and actually it wasn't a librarian, it was usually those helpers, said, you can ping them back, which means that when they get it, then they only have it for 2 weeks. Yes. All right.
So Steve, that's an interesting thing. A lot of the nomenclature, a lot of the terminology about Sora operates very similarly to how things work in the school library. So what you're talking about is placing a hold, right? You're saying, okay, you have the book checked out, Steve. I would like to read it. I'm going to place a hold on your copy. That absolutely happens in Sora. And we have in-app notifications so that the student is notified when that book is available, so that they can get their turn and they can have a turn with the book. Now, also, right, the school librarian or the person at the school who is managing the collection, monitoring the collection, and keeping tabs on activity that's happening with the digital book collection, they also will be able to see that there's a wait list, as long as my arm, for a very popular hot title that's really popping in their school. If you are a school librarian and you've got 15 kids waiting to read the next book in the series, you absolutely are all over that, because what that is signaling is, interest and love of reading. And not only that, kids talking to other kids in your school about books. Hallelujah. Is there,
Nice, yes.
Talk about, as an educator, mission accomplished, right? That's the moment you crave. You want kids to be talking about books with other kids. Absolutely. So you could go in and fulfill more copies or purchase more copies for your digital collection, so that hold and that wait time for the kids is eliminated.
I love that. So let's talk about a little bit about your experience as a librarian and promoting reading, because you got me thinking about all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, because sometimes the adults in my building, when I was a principal, I noticed I had this one teacher and librarian. They were ordering enough copies of books to make sure that they had books that kids could check out, because the teacher wanted these. And one of them was at that time there was not a movie yet, and I had not heard of Orson Scott Card or his book Ender's Game. And the librarian looked at me and said, "You have not heard of this book?" and so she pulled aside one and checked it out to me, and she said, "You're expected to read this, and we can talk about it as you read it if you want to talk." And I did, because it was cool. And she did the same thing for me with a book by, if you've ever heard of the writer James Rawlins, who writes a lot of thriller adventures. But at that time, he was working on books that were specifically for YA, and they were awesome. And so she did the same thing with me there. She checked out a book specifically for me and said, we'll have discussions. And she made sure. And so that's how she promoted me. And as a note, I never have given it up, because just this last summer, I think it was, one of my colleagues on the podcast, out in the podcast world, he said to me, he goes, it'd be cool if we read the same book and then talked about it and discussed some of the stuff that's in it. So we read the book Rocket Boys, and there's a movie called October Sky, and so then they changed the title to October Sky to go with it. And we had this really cool discussion the same way. So my point is that it's pretty cool how you can promote reading and doing different stuff. I was wondering about, because a matter of fact, in some ways, I kind of was bullied into, you will read and meet with me and talk with me about this. Now, I love the books. So
remember, I told you there are only two kinds of librarians. You got one who's going to,
yes.
You know what kind you had. And that's great, because I think, again, that's a parallel, right? That is also a kind of, that is also an inception point, right? When does the love of reading actually begin? Sometimes it begins because you stumble into it. Sometimes it's because you saw the, book to film, right? You saw the movie, you want to read the book. There are numerous ways that the moment, that inception, right? I'm a reader. I become a reader. I like books. This is turning me on. I want to read more. For you, it actually happened because you were prescribed a book, right? That is didactic. That's like, you go read this book. Here, I'm going to give it to you. You know, you don't have a choice. You go read the book and you're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. Now, that kind of moment is also supported in Sora because that too is a K-12 educational experience that is necessary. All kids have to have that too. Somebody has to tell a kid, you got to read this book. You don't have a choice. And that's why in our app, there's an assignments tool, right, where an educator can go into the app and they can push that book to the student's platform. It shows up. You can't get rid of it. It's there. It's on your shelf.
Nice.
You go read this book. Now, that is an appropriate use in K-12. That's another one of those ways where Sora is very different from Libby because the use cases are different in K-12 than they are in public library. But that's one of them where you are absolutely prescribed a title that somebody says you need to have this. And one of the great things about digital reading is that works for a one-to-one case, like in your case, Steve, where somebody's handing you a book, right? You could press a button and assign it, you know, librarian can assign it to Steve right now, but also a teacher, an educator, somebody who has appropriate permissions can push that out to numerous students at the same time. We worked with a very large district in the Southeast that did an all grade read in grade 4 and read Hidden Figures Young Readers Edition, push the button and 4,000 students have that book.
Wow.
You know, like the whole district is reading this book at the same time. It was a team read. It was a group read. We also see that use case, especially for also for professional development, where teachers are expected to read some book necessary for certification or because they're doing some PD as a district. And so everybody needs to have access to the same book at the same time. So it's not just kids that use Sora. It's everybody in the district is using Sora.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Did you go read this book, Steve?
Yeah, exactly. Because I could just see those. If I was in this day with that, working with those same people, they'd be sending me little pings or whatever, saying, "You have a book to read."
Yeah. And you know, I think, you know, the other thing is you're touching on the notion of how do we share the experience of the book. We've all read the book, and now we're going to talk about the book, and we're going to be in the book together. I think that's something that is also supported by digital reading. You know, things that print can do, digital can do better in some ways. And this is one of them, is where you say, I'm going to capture a highlight or a note or a section or a passage of this book, and I'm going to annotate it. I'm doing that throughout the whole book. Sora's capturing that annotation. Then I'm going to share the annotations with you, my teacher or my colleague. I'm going to export that and give you my annotations on this, you know, the section or the excerpt. I'm going to give that back to you. And so that is a lot easier than taking a sticky note and sticking it in a paper book and handing the whole paper book to your teacher, you know, which is how a lot of students will do annotation. They have to sticky note it, mark it up with pen. Oh, heaven forfend, we're going to write in a book. Right, dog-ear the pages, right? And then we're going to hand that to somebody. So in a lot of ways, you know, digital facilitates that as well. Same thing with like translation, right? If English isn't your first language and you're reading a book in English, you need to right-click that and get a definition on it. And that's something, again, you can have that right in your reading experience in a way that is harder with print. I cannot think of the last time that my kids actually picked up a dictionary and looked up a word in a dictionary. Like, that's not a thing people do anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Which is sad because I don't think they know how to do that.
Because I'm even on that planet, because it's like once I learned how easy you can do it on any of those platforms out there, it's because you can also get how to say it too, and it's like
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Again, and that's a thing. You think, yes, a dictionary is important, and when there's no internet access, you absolutely need a paper dictionary in your house. Or if you just want to see it or understand, there are things paper does that you cannot replicate online. On the other hand, you've just mentioned a couple attributes or features about digital that make the experience better for a student who needs that. And that's to each his own, but that is definitely a use case that is supported by digital.
So cool. There's just many different, you know, because you are talking to somebody who loves to hold a paper book, all right? And I like the feel and so forth. And there's just a neat smell that comes with a new book and all that sort of stuff. But there are so many cool digital things that can happen. And the annotation is one of those because if you look in my books, I write, all right? I write in my books. I underline things, I highlight, I respond to things, it's like, yes, this is a good idea. That's that type of thing.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's that the horrified look that some people get when they see that I'm writing. You're writing in that book? Here's the electronic one. You don't have to, no, you don't mess it up. Anyway, but.
Well, but I think, you're having a personal relationship with your read, right? That's exactly what you're describing, is that you are in that book, you are internalizing its ideas, you're processing them, and you're saying it back. And I think that is obviously a thing print has always done. Digital can do that too. And I think we were talking at the top of the hour about, the things that stuck, the things that we learned when we were trying to educate through the pandemic. And I think that getting to the heart of what is the intention of what we are doing here. Why? Okay, we're reading a book. What are we trying to do? I've assigned to you Esperanza Rising. What are we trying to do about this book? We're trying to have you read it, have a personal relationship with the characters in the book. Hopefully, the windows and mirrors things are activating. You see yourself reflected in this book. You have a window into other people's experiences. You're internalizing that, you're reacting to it, and then you're expressing your reactions. That is what we are trying to do when we read a book, I hope, in many cases, in a learning environment, right? Digital can support that. And I think that's, what stuck is that people said, hey, wait, educator people said, hey, wait, we can do this as effectively, cost effectively, or more equitably with digital than we could with print. And that's something that really turned that new growth, that post-forest fire growth for us, was the light bulb going off for people saying, we could do this. There are advantages to this. We can get kids to engage with content in a different way. You're in spoken word. People like to listen to audiobooks as well, right? So it's not just print. Every ebook is a large print book. Every, audiobook is a spoken word experience for people. So, these are things that print is doing, or these are things that digital books are doing for students in a way that still achieves the intent. The intent was engage. So now we're engaging in a different way.
I love it. I love it. There's nothing better than that, because that's, if whether it's those librarians I was telling you about that were trying to get me to read other books, was because they said, we know you read a lot of nonfiction. You're reading leadership and you're reading education books and all this sort of stuff. You need to get into the world of fiction a little bit. And so they were prescribing these amazing reads like that. And what's interesting is that, the same thing can happen as you're interacting in nonfiction. You can, if the writer is that good, and some of those I just mentioned to you aren't that good, where you start wanting to boo the bad guy and cheer the good guy or whatever the situation, or say, no, don't open that door. What are you anyway.
Right. Well, that's how you're engaging, right?
Yes.
When you feel something. And that's the intent of it, right? We know that education works when students feel, right? When your emotions are at play, you remember things better. When there's multi-sensory experiences happening, you remember things better. When there's a smell or a feeling or a tactile experience that goes with it. We know that is what makes learning stick. And creates the desire for more learning. So I think, as long as we're achieving that, however means we achieve that, that's what we're trying to do.
That's cool. I love that. So with, reading scores kind of not doing that well in this country, what do you think are some of the problems what are some of those barriers that are interfering with kids, wanting to read or learning to read or, becoming better at it?
Yeah, I think there's some very easy answers to that question. And I think there are some complex answers to that question. The easy answer is kids don't have the books. We don't have anything to read, Steve. I mean, this is a real problem and a real challenge, right? I read a study, this was back in 2020, this is 2022, that when the ESSER money was coming out, they did a poll of some 3,000 educators, and 99% of the people who were asked, what should we do with all this money, said, we need access to books and materials. We need the things of school. We need books, textbooks, papers, things to read, to work with, because, in a lot of districts that are have-not districts, that are low socioeconomic community districts, it's a challenge. They don't have a school librarian. The person you and I are talking about, this librarian who's showing you care and affection and and doing great readers advisory, it sounds like, they don't have that person, right? They don't have the books. There's just a gap in terms of the resources that are necessary to get kids reading. The factoid that I picked up out of the NCES data was, the kids that read more for pleasure in a week, I think it was, there's some threshold, it was like, 30 minutes or something, or 2 hours or whatever, is like more for pleasure, right? And the frequency of reading for pleasure per week. Those kids were in the top decile, were in the top quartile. Those kids who read for pleasure frequently, daily, weekly, right, scored better than kids who don't read for pleasure. All other things aside, like, I don't know, did you study for the test? Did you do the vocab? Did you do the phonics exam? I don't know. But kids that were reading for pleasure, just more at bats, more time in a book, scored better on NCES reading data than kids who didn't. So that tells me, okay, if we got kids reading more, that correlates with scoring higher, regardless of what else is going on in their environment. Okay, what do we need to make that happen? A book, right? You need a book. That is the minimum foundational unit of reading, is a book, an item to read. So, the simple answer to your question is, on the simple end is, how about just more books for more kids? Give people more books and let them enjoy them. I think, on the complex end of things, I'm sure there are a lot of educators listening to this going, well, yeah, it's not that simple, right? Because it's complicated, right? Why are reading scores? Tanking would be a drastic thing to say, but they were the lowest they've been in a decade or more. And it's really drastic, right? Why did this happen? I've heard educators say, we were always headed for this. The pandemic just underscored all of the inequities, gaps, and issues in K-12 education and made them worse. It exacerbated things that were already present. Okay, well, we knew that there was a learning gap. We knew that there were achievement gaps. We knew that there are varying qualities of instructional materials that are being taught in schools, right? We also have an environment where there are book bans happening. So, we've taken books off the shelves. We've taken things out of school libraries. So it's like, okay, all of that is now baked into those lower numbers as well. And obviously those problems are not just solved with more books. There are funding issues and training and, community opinions and just bringing more wherewithal for educators, right? That's a lot more complicated. But I think at the end of the day, those reading scores didn't get like that just because of pandemic. It wasn't just because of that. We've been heading for some sort of decline for some time, according to many people I've spoken with.
You're talking to someone who my parents always had books around and had relatives, and they're always reading. And I'm pretty sure that at an early point in my life, without getting TMI, that they stuck me in rooms with a book, and hey, check this out, and and encourage reading that way. And then I had relatives who bought me books. I still have some of those books where they wrote a little message in the top of it or something like that, and just the cool thing of how it was encouraged. To look into these different topics and so forth, just simply by someone sharing those books. And it saddens me when I find out that, I've had students who, I questioned whether the parent read anything other than a text message or something like that, because, you realize that this is where where some kids struggle, is that is really, the parents needing to know that it is important that they encourage the venturing into whatever lands of some of the books, or the nonfiction world of the prehistoric dinosaurs, or the nonfiction world of something, and or the fiction world of like the ones I described to you. And it's just, I think it is sad when you see that this is not a possibility, that it's too much of it used to say, at least they have a newspaper in the house. Well, those are
and those are gone too, right?
Yeah, speaking of dinosaurs,
right. Well, Steve, you make a good point, and it makes me think of, it doesn't matter how you get your exercise. You're supposed to get your heart rate up for 15 or 60 minutes a day, or whatever the recommendation is. You got to get your heart rate up, Well, if you want to do Zumba or Pilates or go lift weights or run around the track, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting that exercise, because it strengthens your heart, it strengthens your body, it's good for you, right? Reading is the same way. And we know that just time spent reading is healthful for young people's minds. It is essential to not only just glean new information. We know that, gathering information about the world is important to build on your skills, reading to learn versus learning to read, right? You got to get the information, but it's also just the muscles of making your brain muscles stronger to learn how to focus for concentrate and be in a book for 20 minutes, that being able to dwell in the content for long periods of time helps you practice for doing that for math or history or any other academic endeavor. You've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to build your vocabulary so that you can start thinking, about how sentences work and structures and how to get the ideas into your mind, right? Like just all of the things that reading does for you. It's like getting your heart rate up. Just time in a book is healthful for developing minds. So yeah, if a parent is saying, we're just not a household that exercises, what do you think is going to happen, right? If that's your culture and that's what's going on in your home, it's going to be really hard for a school, for an educator to come in and intervene or to supplement a kid and say, no, this is important, when you're getting a conflicting message at home. That's hard to overcome. I'm not saying that it can't be or that it should be, but it is difficult if you aren't getting that support at home for kids. And that's why, one of the things I like about digital reading is that book goes anywhere the student's device is, anywhere the student is. The student can log in on mom and dad's phone, at home with their parents. They can read together with mom and dad. What are you into? Here, let me show you. Give me your phone, mom. I'll log in. I want to show you the book I'm into. That's a moment that Sora facilitates as well, especially if mom and dad or parents or guardians are not readers. So, anywhere reading is something that is really important to just get the reps in,
It makes so much sense because I like the picture you're making there, because that was like, that is something that it takes time. It takes doing it in order to be able to, because otherwise, you've seen some of these books out there that I have a son who devours these books that are definitely popping at 1,100 pages or somewhere like that. And, sometimes I look at a book like that and I go, yeah, well, maybe to keep my door open. But it's the more you read though, the better chances that you're going to be able to move through some of these other lengthy books. And, and just like you're talking about with the vocabulary, I was a big fan. I still am, but he's passed away, although I'm amazed at how he still continues to write even after he's passed away. If you ever heard of the writer Tom Clancy, I'm former military, and it was neat to read his books. And it was amazing to me as an educator, I was noticing how many words were in there that were part of these lists for the SAT and ACT. And I'm like, wow, this is, it explains a lot why a lot of the kids who are pushing through those books and things like that are a little tougher, that challenge them with the words, might have that experience that you're talking about, which is getting more advanced thoughts and ideas and understanding those ideas that they read about. So.
Yeah, that's a great example. It's an equity challenge as well. Like you're in the book, you're reading the words, you're reading words that are on the SAT exam. Now, you could have done a vocabulary test, like the Sadlier vocab quiz, like we're going to learn vocab in school. But if you're in the book and reading those words all the time because you read for pleasure, you're already you've got a natural advantage when it comes time to do the SAT or any other standardized test.
So let's go there for just a minute. We're getting close to wrapping up, but what advice would you give to educators and school leaders looking to leverage those digital resources? Take it to that next step. What do they need to do?
Well, I think, again, sticking with easy solutions, get more kids in more books more often, right? That's get more kids reading for more time. This is hard. Even the simplest answer is difficult to achieve, right? Because kids have multiple demands on their time, and it sounds easy. Yeah, read more. Okay. Okay. if that is our ambition and our objective, because we know that reading more builds vocabulary, sets them up for success, gets better, higher test scores, right? If we know that reading more has the outcomes that educators are looking for, then I do recommend a couple things. I think there are, I'm gonna prescribe some stuff to
Nice.
to the world. Here you go.
Nice.
I'm gonna tell people what I think about it. I think number one, building a robust digital collection, just in the same way that we used to have robust print collections in every school building, in every community. This is a must. If we can't have physical books, or we don't have staff, or we don't have labor, which is a real concern in K-12, we're out of people. All right, build a digital collection, make sure you tend it and mind it. Overdrive helps with that. You don't even have to, we have people for that. We will assist, right? If you're out of people, we can put some people on it with you. But it's like, make sure you make the resource available. That would be the first thing that I would say, if we're trying to get kids to read more. The second thing is I would integrate reading. I'm a little biased, digital reading, into the daily course of instruction. So for example, if you want to teach history, give kids a supplemental history book, a nonfiction history or a fiction history book to go with the unit of study that you're teaching. There is a book for every topic. If it's math or science or whatever, there's a book for that. Go find the book and assign it, and make sure that your kids are in the book to help stimulate, augment, and buttress whatever they're learning. So you got to bake it into the instruction that they're having in the classroom. The third thing is, I would get staff and community and everybody who's not a student on board with reading. It's not enough to just build a collection. If you build it, they'll come. It's not enough to point your finger and say, you got to read this book because I told you to, right? That's assigned reading, right? That's bullet 1 and 2, right? The third bullet is get everybody on board with this and have them help promote the use of digital reading, or reading in general. This is true for print and digital. I'm going to be agnostic about it, right? Get everybody on board. And that means getting your teachers reading, having parents invited to come and share in what their students are doing, right? It should never be antagonistic between the teacher and the parent, right? This is a team. We are team teaching the student. So get mom and dad on board. How can they do reading with their student? They can use Sora with their kid, right? At home. Tell them what to read. Tell them how to read to a kid. Not everybody knows how to do story time. I know they tell you read to your kid, but what if you're bad at it and you don't know how, right? Okay, help mom and dad figure it out, right?
Right.
Same thing with, the rest of the community, and that's public library support as well. Our product integrates with public libraries. We have a thing called Public Library Connect, so that students can access their local public library through the app and check out books from their local public library's digital collection too. Great. So the more the merrier. Get everybody on board and create all of the people around that student, create an environment, create an atmosphere where they're encouraging a child to go discover their own reading joys and discover what they want to be, what turns them on, right? To get people to support that student. So those would be 3 things I would recommend.
That's awesome. Love it. As we finish up here, one of the things I'd like to ask you is, if they want to find out more about Overdrive, where do they reach out to? What do they take a look at? How do they start that conversation?
Yeah, our basic website is discoversora.com. And if people want to just drop us an email, it's schools@overdrive.com. And I'll say that again, it's schools@overdrive.com.
Awesome. And I'll put that information in the show notes so it's easy to find, and so they can go from there. So I got 2 last questions I'd like to ask you, Angela, that go like this. These are just questions I like to ask my guests. And the first one is, how do you keep going when so much is going on that you may want to quit?
Thank you for asking that question. I think, who among us working in K-12 or working in the industry right now hasn't felt that way? It's hard right now to be a teacher. It's hard to be an educator. It's hard to be a person who is supporting those people. That's my role. I'm a cheerleader. I'm rooting these people on, and it's hard for me to keep rooting them on because, wow, it's hard. And it's been difficult for the last couple of years. And we have seen a lot of people who decide that they cannot do it anymore. They cannot keep going. And that's understandable. They've got families and it's hard. I think for me, the going back up to our mission, and referring to that, that's what keeps me going, is a world enlightened by reading, right? I know that when I wake up in the morning that the work that I'm doing is designed to support more kids reading more books, discovering and finding their own joy in a book, in a concept, and in an idea. There's nothing more powerful than an idea. And so if I can help support somebody's discovery of something new of themselves, of their learning journey, then I'm making the world a better place. So that helps me keep going.
Love that answer. That's awesome. Thank you. Last question. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Oh, I got a lot of teachers that were pretty awesome. And I had a lot of great elementary school teachers who really were transformative in my life. I'm going to give a shout out to Mrs. Agard. May she rest in peace. She was my kindergarten teacher. And I was an early reader. I loved to read. Even at 5, I was into books, and I was good at it for my age, I think. And I wanted to find things that I could tackle. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted more things. And I remember we went to the library together. We had a school library, and I lived in rural Michigan in a not very affluent community, but we had a school library, and we had a library. She walked down with me one day and she said, I'm going to show you some other books. You need these. This is what you need. And she kind of did that thing where you turn someone on and you say, I think this is where your interests lie. Can we talk about it? She did that with me, and we sat down, and I found something. I don't remember what it was. And I said, well, none of the other kids are reading this, or this is weird or something. What if I get, picked on, or I don't know. It's not what we have, right? This is different. And she said, it's okay. It's okay to be different. You need to find what works for you. And that was her message. And I'm sure she said it in a much better way. She was an awesome, how kindergarten teachers are like kid whisperers, and she said that in a way that validated me and said, your choices that make you unique are valid. It's okay to be you. And I think that that is a message that every student, heck, every adult needs to hear. It's okay to be you. Validate your choices, find what turns you on, find what resonates for you, and then share it out in the world.
I love that. That is awesome. That's so important. And Angela, cool stories. I love that stuff. And thank you so much for all the work you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing with us about Overdrive and the power of it, and the ideas that come with the digital reading resources, and getting the ability to read and the access to reading materials in the hands of kids. This has been an awesome talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. What a pleasure. I'm so glad that we shared this time together. Appreciate it.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.